Everybody know that today.
Right.
As you're driving into work, Tom Luginbill is smoking really good cigars, having some good libations and good food in Naples for all of us. All right, let's talk. It's fun. The draft is fun. People geek out on it, and it's we've got a guy here that it looks like has. I think he went from like a third round pick to possibly going in the first round for one because he's good. Two, because Carson Beck didn't have the year he wanted. It's coming back. Milroe, it may drop in the draft, and some other things. But now I'm going to continue to ask you this. Do you have a surefire – Cam Ward's your surefire number one on your draft board, right? At QB?
I don't have a surefire number one, Bo, because I don't think it's a great quarterback class.
You're not the only one to tell us that. Go ahead.
Yeah, listen, top to bottom. Now, are there some intriguing options? Are there some back half round guys where you say, that guy could be a steal? Maybe it's a Kyle McCord. Maybe it's a Curtis Rourke. Maybe it's a Will Howard. But even when you start to get into that conversation of Cam Ward, Shedeur Sanders, Jaxson Dart, Quinn Ewers, you can throw Jalen Milroe in the conversation. I think, and I've talked to some NFL guys that have real concerns about the long-term success possibilities of a lot of these guys. Now, the one thing that I think is really, really important, and this is where Jaxson Dart, Kyle McCord, I would say Will Howard, and probably Curtis Rourke have some advantages, and that is that they've played a ton of snaps.
Yes.
There's a really large sample size. Now, you may say, well, why does that matter? What if there's a 3-and-out talented phenom? Well, it matters because there's proof it matters. Look at Bo Nix. Look at Jaden Daniels, right? And you find yourself in a situation where, because of the COVID year, because of redshirting, because of sitting, and all of a sudden you have another extra 150 to 200 snaps than you normally would have. You've seen a lot of things, right? You're older, you're more mature, your leadership skills have flourished, and they've started to advance. And then that transitions to making that learning curve less steep. Now, what we have in this class is we've got, a 3-and-out guy in Shedeur Sanders. We have a guy in Cam Ward that falls more into the camp of Bo Nix and Jaden Daniels, right? I think that's a positive for him. The downside is, and a lot of people are going to look at this and they're going to say, why does that matter? Well, look at history in the NFL. Cam Ward comes from almost a strictly dominant air raid form of offensive system, which is fine. It's one of the greatest offensive systems in the history of college football. You look at the last 30 years of the NFL, and you can name like 3 or 4 guys that have been able to last in the NFL, become probable, marketable, high-value starters. So you start to ask yourself, okay, is Cam Ward Patrick Mahomes, or is Cam Ward Bryce Petty? And you start naming off all those names. Yeah. And you start to look at all of these guys that are prominent college football, really talented guys, but didn't make it in the National Football League.
That was well done. Tom Luginbill on the Farm Bureau Insurance Guest Line. I like that. You just can't put a price on experience and starting a ton of games and playing well and not playing well.
Yeah, well, and let's really, if you really put this thing under a microscope. So, whether it's for your listeners or people who love to listen to podcasts or watch TV shows that are covering the draft and this and that, like, we've got to understand the rarefied air that the people we're talking about are in, right? And the failure rate in the first round is 50%.
Wow.
On one guy. It's not like, okay, we're signing a class of 25, 17-year-olds, and we're crossing our fingers that we hit on 60% of them.
Right.
That means that you're going to miss on 10 guys. You don't know which 10, but going in that the numbers are going to tell you that's what's going to happen. Well, if you look, so there's 32 NFL teams. There's just a smidge over 2,000 players on NFL rosters. all right, only 320 rookies will make an NFL opening day roster. Okay? So you're going to have roughly, 300, maybe a little bit more than that drafted. And then the average player career, forget about becoming a starter, forget about becoming a great player, is around 3.3 years. All right? So we're trying to project a number that the failure rate is so high that, to be honest with you, it's anybody's guess, like, whether a guy is going to make it or not. You can do all the homework you want, but it guarantees you nothing.
Yeah. All right, so let's dive in and still debate it. And, all right, outside of – so Cam and Shador are the names that are thrown out first for most everybody. Fair or not?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. And then the second group is Dart, Milroe. Rourke tore his ACL. I don't know how. I mean, he's a hell of a football player, Luke's, but I don't know how that.
Played a ton of football, too.
He played a ton
really
of football.
Successful.
Yes, he was. Good grief. But I don't know how that will impact his. For our listeners, he played at Indiana, and before that.
He was a 3-year starter at Ohio.
Yes.
Yep.
Kurt Signetti grabbed him, which is one of the best gets in the portal since the portal has opened several years ago. Good grief. And so that'll be interesting to see how it impacts his draft status because they know he can ball. Like, who balled out? Kyle McCord, Luke's at Syracuse.
Oh, yeah.
That dude played his tail off. And, how do you project him? I mean, is he do you project him as, no, Bo, look, he's going to be a backup, which is still a great way to make 50 to 100 million. Or no, I think maybe in the right franchise with the right coach, Shanahan, McVay, Peyton, who all these dudes are, all these super talented guys. In the right spot, he could actually start in the NFL for a few years. How do you project Kyle McCord?
I think if Brock Purdy has put himself in that position, right, then you look at a guy like Kyle McCord and you say, okay, if you get to the right place at the right time with the right personnel around you and the opportunity presents itself, and that's really what so much of this is. And then you take advantage of it and you make the most of the opportunity. I put Kyle McCord kind of in the same boat as Will Howard. Now, Will's a better athlete. He's going to be able to probably get you out of more trouble. But they've played at a highly productive level. I don't know if anybody looks at Kyle McCord and says, okay, this guy is an elite level anything. He may be really, really good in a lot of areas, not elite in any one single area.
Okay.
But he's played a lot of football, and I think there's value in that. Does that mean he could go in and become a Nick Foles type guy for somebody?
Okay.
Absolutely. Could Will Howard be a Nick Foles type somebody? Absolutely. Could they be in a position to where
Alex Smith
they become well, Alex Smith was supremely talented. He just had a lot of bad luck.
You're right.
I mean, remember, let's not forget, Alex Smith.
He was balling out
from Kansas. Yeah, got traded from Kansas City, and had been to AFC Championship games, and then obviously has the injury at Washington. But like a guy, and I'm going to say this name, but a guy played for, I want to say close to 13 or 14 years. All of these guys we're talking about right now, maybe even a Curtis Rourke, although I think Curtis Rourke's a little bit different, but they all could end up being Chase Daniel. Remember Chase Daniel from Missouri? Great career there under Gary Pinkel, and then got himself into the National Football League. And he was always smarter than the next guy, maybe not as talented as the next guy, but reliable and trustworthy so he'd make the roster. And he did that for a long time. And then if he had to play, he played pretty decently. And I think a lot of the guys in this draft group kind of fall into that category.
I think you nailed that. Okay, so what you said, Curtis Rourke, for our listeners, Indiana went to the college football playoffs, had a magnificent year, best year ever.
Yeah.
And Kurt Signetti found him at Ohio, and it really worked. But he tore his ACL at the end of the year. You said he's a little bit different. What'd you mean?
I think there's something about him. He's got some anticipatory traits and the ability to work through progressions and process really, really quickly. And he's a guy who hasn't been necessarily in the spread. He's been in spread concepts, but even going back to Tim Albin's Ohio teams that he played for there, who's now the coach of Charlotte, by the way. And then, you look at Curt Cignetti, and when Curt Cignetti has publicly said this, everybody oftentimes in the transfer portal is looking for the high-profile guy that everybody knew is a high-profile recruit. Curt Cignetti went into the transfer portal and says, I want the most highly productive player. I don't care what his name is, and I don't care where he was at previously. How productive was this guy when he played? And I think there's a lot of value in that. And there's a large sample size for the NFL to value and scrutinize and all of those different things with that guy. And I use the term scrutinize, right? Because this kind of always leads me to this one guy. But this is what we're in scrutinize season, right? Yeah. Everybody's either trying to check the right box or discover the red flag. Those are the two targets. And when you're doing that, the number one guy that I think is the most controversial is Shedeur Sanders. Because if you go through and you just look at talent, you're going to really like Shedeur Sanders, right? If you go through and you say, okay, how many actual good teams or good defenses did he play well against, and did they beat? And it's hard to find any.
Wow.
Okay. Now, are there a variety of reasons for that? Absolutely. Doesn't have great personnel around him. Certainly did at the skill spots. But even last year, though they improved in the offensive line, they were not a good football team in the offensive line, right? And so he's constantly having to, I think, overperform with the weight of the team on his shoulders. And you know what that's led to? And you watch him, and I hear NFL guys talk about this all the time, and they're right. He has bad habits. And his worst bad habit is holding on to the football.
Mm-hmm.
And it's derived from a habit that you love, and that's a desire to utilize his competitive temperament to never let the play die, which you can get away with in college if you're supremely talented.
Right.
You hold onto the ball like that in the National Football League, you're in serious trouble, right? So then you ask yourself, can we iron out the bad habits? And if so, how do we do it? And I think, to be honest with you, and I think he's a really talented guy, highly productive, can do some special things. And I've said this before, and I take a lot of heat for this comment. If his name was Shedeur Smith, would we be having the same conversation about him as a prospect?
No.
Okay. So, and I hear a lot of people echo exactly what you just said. What's interesting to me is that for some reason there's this public sentiment that nobody's allowed to criticize Colorado or critique Colorado. Nobody's allowed to critique Deion Sanders. Nobody's allowed to critique Shedeur Sanders or have an opinion that isn't just this glowing adoration. Well, that's not reality. And so I try to look at it far from more of an objective standpoint of comparative analysis. Forget the names, just throw the tape on, forget the players, forget the number on the jersey, and see what happens.
Right. That's a good way to frame it up. Tom Luginbill with ESPN. He joins us on the Farm Bureau Insurance guest line, and the show is driven by your next Ford Explorer at Mack Hike Ford, I-55 North in Jackson. Pre-owned and new Ford Explorers. They've got plenty there. Best inventory in the state. I want to go back to holding the football. And I've watched all these interviews and documentaries with Peyton Manning and Tom Brady, and they talk about how important it is to get the ball out of your hand, which you just alluded to. Now, Steve Palazzolo, Pro Football Focus, comes on the show a lot, and he says the overwhelming majority of the time, I want to see what you think. You started Power 5 at QB, you've coached QBs, all this. He says that the majority of the time, sacks are on the quarterback for holding the ball. You agree with that?
100%.
Okay.
Now, if you would have asked me that question 25 years ago, I don't know if I would have been as emphatic about it. But in today's game, with all of the underneath stuff, all of the shotgun-based offenses, nobody plays under center anymore, right? Mm-hmm. If you're not getting the ball out of your hand and you're not making and processing decisively, you heard me mention anticipatory traits, meaning throwing the ball to a spot on time, and that guy better be there, right? You're anticipating that he's going to be there. You're going to anticipate the window. If you're not doing that, that's on you. And there's not an offensive line that can save you from that. The offensive line is there to buy you time. But if you hold on to the ball or you pat the ball more so than any time in the history of the sport, there's no question that sacks are a quarterback stat.
Okay. Tom Luginbill talking QBs with us on the Out of Bounds show, ESPN 105.9 The Zone. All things are equal. Both are healthy, all that. Who would, as a general manager, Lugs, who would you draft? Jaxson Dart or Curtis Rourke?
Jaxson Dart.
Okay.
And I say that for a couple reasons. Number one, Curtis Rourke has a history of injury. By the way, that's his second ACL. He had one in Ohio too. Yeah. And I do believe that, guys who have exhibited a long history of injury, Tua Tagovailoa is a great example. They generally are going to, at some point or another, be injured again.
Blake Shapen, go ahead.
We got Blake Shapen, same thing. So that's just kind of part of the deal. The thing that I think people like about Jaxson Dart is, number one, like we said, he's played a ton of football. But he's also played a ton of football in an offense that people want to label as a spread offense, but really what they are is a heavy play-action team that pushes the ball vertically. They're not a dink-and-dunk team, meaning that when you turn on the tape, you're going to see Jaxson Dart have to make throws that are not easy throws, right? Whether that's at what I would term the intermediate level of the field, so 12 to 25, and then the deep level of the field, 25 and beyond. He does a lot of that, like a ton of it. And then on top of it, you add the toughness, the athleticism, the gunslinger mentality. It's going to be really attractive to people. And so I think that, and it's one of the reasons why he's rising up the charts. And again, we're in scrutinizing season. So every time he gets on the board with an NFL position coach or a scout or whatever, he's being scrutinized. Every time he does a pro day, he's being scrutinized. They're trying to check the boxes. They're trying to identify red flags all the time, because by this point, they've seen the tape. They've seen all of the play. They've seen the production. They know what their record is. They've taken his best 5 games against the highest-ranked opponents. They've taken his worst 5 games against the highest-ranked opponents. They've broken him down to the last play. So now it becomes who's the pretty girl to take to the dance? Mm-hmm. And you have to start to really uncover personality quirks, body language, identifying competitive temperament, mental toughness, theory of the game, how does he interact with other teammates and other peers. That's the world we're in right now.
All right. All things, where do you have Dylan? We've got a couple of minutes here too. Where does Dylan Gabriel fit in for you in all this discussion?
I think if he was 6'2" or 3, he'd be one of the highest ranked players in this draft class, because his production level is so high, and he's done it with 3 different teams. He's done it at the Group of 5 level. He's done it at Oklahoma. He's done it now at Oregon. And he is, now you talk about getting the ball out of your hand. That dude can get the ball out of his hand. He just doesn't have what I would label as the ideal elite level physical measurables or skill set that NFL teams crave and would love to have. And it doesn't mean he can't be successful. But what happens is it puts others who have that in a little bit of a different light than him. But I think he's, if you ask me, okay, how talented is he? I would respond to you, I don't care how talented he is. Ask me how productive he is. Mm-hmm. That dude is productive.
He's going to make a roster.
I think so. I mentioned the Chase Daniels, the Ty Detmers.
Right.
What was the kid out of Houston that played forever? University of Houston.
Keenum?
Oh, gosh. Case Keenum. I mean, all of those guys, there's a reason they're around.
Yeah.
And there's a reason to make a roster every time. And it's generally the same list of reasons.
Yeah. That was awesome. All right, Tom Luginbill on the Farm Bureau Insurance Guest Line, talking QBs and NFL drafts. It's going to be a ton of fun. See what shakes out here. I think the draft's in Green Bay, so from now till late April.
Hope it ain't outdoors.
Hey, enjoy Naples. And
Will do, buddy.
Have a cigar for me. We'll talk soon, okay?
Sounds good, pal. See ya.
Tom Luginbill, National College Football Analyst with ESPN, talking Jaxson Dart. And all the QBs that want to go first, second, third round, or just make a roster. He joined us on the Out of Bounds show, brought to you by Independent Roofing Systems, the #1 commercial industrial roofing company in Mississippi, roofing.ms.